Today, from New York City, with an endowment of over $50 billion, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is on a mission to change the world. Time magazine proclaimed that Melinda Gates' pioneering dedication to philanthropy will impact generations to come.
We have this belief that first of all, that all lives, no matter where they're lived in the world, have equal value.
Growing up in Dallas, Texas, Melinda remembers her family gathering around the TV to watch Apollo mission launches her father worked on as an aerospace engineer. Melinda graduated valedictorian from the all-girls Catholic Ursuline Academy of Dallas. She became one of a few female coders at Duke University, where she earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees. In 1987, she turned down an offer to work for IBM. In a date with destiny, she interviewed for a Seattle tech company known as Microsoft. Melinda got the job, quickly rising in the ranks to a management position. She also caught the attention of Microsoft's famous CEO. The couple dated for 6 years before celebrating their engagement with a trip to Africa. It was on that vacation, during a walk on the beach, when the couple say they envisioned their life's calling.
The more we talked, we knew we were going to give the resources, the vast majority of the resources, away.
In 2000, the Gates' beach conversation would manifest into the world's largest private charity foundation.
When you start to do that work and you put drops in the bucket of connecting with people and understanding other people's lives, you start to see how you have personal talents that you can contribute.
The Gates have spent more than $15 billion worldwide on vaccines, helping to cut the number of child deaths in half.
If you got a vaccine in a child's arm in Africa, it literally would save their life.
Melinda has zeroed in on grants to fund family planning programs to empower women in the poorest countries. Her goal is to make contraceptives available to 120 million more women by the end of this decade.
There are women all over the world who will tell you it is a life and death crisis.
To date, the foundation has donated more than $45 billion to charitable causes.
These resources that Bill and I have, we have to put them to the best use to lift up hundreds of millions of men, women, and children.
In her new book, The Moment of Lift, How Empowering Women Changes the World, Melinda asks, how can we summon a moment of lift for human beings, and especially for women? Because when you lift up women, you lift up humanity. Welcome, Melinda Gates! Thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. You know, I wanted you to be here after I read your book, Moment of Lift, because I had so many ahas personally reading it. I want to talk to you about that. But here's the real deal. Anytime you say your name, people immediately think money. They just think money's flowing out of your ears. It's everywhere. And they think, oh my God, your problems are not like anybody else's problems because you can pay for your problems to go away. And in this new book, The Moment of Lift, great title, by the way, you write on page 140 how great wealth can be very confusing. It can inflate and distort your sense of self, especially if you believe that money measures merit. So I just was curious as to how you get to be you, sitting in the greatest wealth on earth, and not be confused by money's measures and merit.
Well, I think it probably comes from the fact that I grew up in a very middle-class family in Dallas, Texas, and we were working very hard to have enough money to send the 4 of us kids to college. And we knew my dad's engineer salary wasn't going to pay for all of it. And so we had, they had a property, a real estate business, and we were cleaning ovens and cleaning out people's messes when they left over and running the finances. I kept the books. And I think growing up in that sort of middle-class family with this dream of going to college, you remember how important it is to get a great education. Like, my parents were determined I would get a good education, but it set my values. I mean, that, and my parents sent me to an all-girls Catholic high school. I kind of wanted to go to a different all-girls school that was more academic, but that social justice grounding I got in high school, it just helped me really wrestle with my values early. And then I would say, lastly, having 3 children, you constantly have to be thinking, what am I teaching my children that I want them to live out in the world? And am I living my life that way by what I say and I do? And so it always, always, always goes back to your values. And so I don't see myself as any different than anybody else. I'm this young girl who grew up in a middle-class family in Dallas, Texas.
I know, but you're multi-billionaire. And this is what's interesting to me that you find out in the moment of lift is that you hadn't even married yet. You were working at Microsoft, and Bill was your boss. Ultimately, he was your boss. He wasn't your immediate boss, but he was ultimately a boss. You got engaged, and you're walking along the beach, and you all start talking about what to do with this great wealth.
Yeah. And because we both came from families who believed in giving back. My parents gave a lot of community service through the church. Bill's family was very involved in philanthropy in Seattle. And we both just knew, so we'd never been to Africa before. In the fall of 1993, we were gonna get married subsequently in January of 94. We both went on our first trip to Africa. And we went because we were gonna do which we did, a beautiful safari with other couples. We saw the animals, the plains, we loved it. But it really was something about the people that just touched us. And we kept saying, how can it be? How can it be that we can be in this nice vehicle or take a commercial flight home, and yet people don't have basic things we have in the United States, clean water, a road. And so we committed at the end of the trip, we had a beach walk some time off the coast in Africa. And the more we talked, we knew we were gonna give the resources, the vast majority of the resources away. And so we committed ourselves that at some point, we would get going on doing that.
So, when you have so much money and there are so many problems in the world, it's really easy to get overwhelmed, especially in Africa. I mean, it's easy just to go and just throw your hands up because you don't even know where to begin, or even how to focus. How did you all focus?
Yeah, and Africa, as you well know, and is many, many, many different countries with many cultures inside every country. But as we started to learn, we started to gather experts around us. We started to think about, okay, first of all, what's the role of philanthropy? So all philanthropy can be is this catalytic wedge. We are not government. We cannot scale things up. Even with our billions of dollars, you can't scale things up. So at that level, but we knew we could take risks and try things. And we knew that Bill and I, coming out of the tech sector, believed in the power of science and innovation to change the world. And so we very early hit on vaccines, that they would be one of the very best investments, that if you got a vaccine in a child's arm in Africa, it literally would save their life. And when we started to learn about the vaccine system and that it was 20 to 25 years from when a vaccine came out in the United States or Europe till it got to Africa.
So millions of kids are gonna die in between.
Literally millions were dying from needless things that we vaccinate our kids from. And so we started there with that simple idea. And once we felt like we could get going and start to make a difference there, we started to add on other pieces in global health over time. Because we have this belief that all lives, no matter where they're lived in the world, have equal value. And if you can't start with great health, you don't even get to go on and have an education and reach your full potential.
Yes, I love that as the fundamental vision, mission statement of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is that all lives have equal value. All lives. Coming up.
Empowering women with access to contraceptives transforms societies. Here's what that looks like in Indonesia. 50 years ago, fewer than 1 in 10 Indonesian women were using family planning tools. The average Indonesian woman had 5 or 6 children, and she was raising them in extreme poverty. Then, Indonesia got serious about expanding access to contraceptives. In just 1 generation,
use skyrocketed to over 50%. Most parents decided to have fewer children. Their kids were able to stay longer in school, and more women were able to work outside the home. Prospects for families across the country began to rise. But progress is not always a straight line, and Indonesia has hit some roadblocks. Today, there are still millions of women in Indonesia who don't want to get pregnant but aren't using contraceptives. When I was in Indonesia earlier this year, I got to meet some of the doctors, midwives, and community volunteers who are working to change that. I joined a group of local women in a village outside the city of Yogyakarta. During the meeting, a community volunteer used an electronic tablet loaded with graphics and videos to answer the women's questions about contraceptives.
Tadinya saya takut MKJP, alhamdulillah dengan dilihatkan ada gambar video cara masangnya itu jadi nggak takut lagi yang dulu katanya implan bisa jalan-jalan, IUD bisa lepas itu kayaknya jadi pengen MKJP.
Dua kali dua bulan lebih terus mau beli lagi kayak ntar aja lah males akhirnya ada itu.
What starts in meetings like this one doesn't end there. Women take the information they've learned and share it with their friends and neighbors. They understand the stakes, and they want to do their part to see that every woman has the chance to do what's best for her family and her future. Indonesia has already proven that progress is possible. Together, we can make sure that progress reaches everyone.
Now, there are so many staggering statistics in the moment of lift. I just want to share a few. More than 130 million girls around the world are still not in school. 40 million women a year give birth without assistance. All of you in here who've had babies, imagine not having a soul there with you. On average, women do 7 years more of unpaid work than men over their lifetimes. From 2002 to 2012, there were more than 14 million child marriages per year. And we mean 10, 11, 12-year-olds getting married around the world. You know, one of the things that was most illuminating for me about the moment of lift is when I came away with this understanding of what it actually means to have family planning. Now, I've done lots of shows about family planning and contraceptives, but there's a moment when you were in line watching women line up, having walked for miles and miles and miles with their children for vaccines. And a woman is also coming hoping to get her contraceptives. And many times you arrive and the contraceptives have already run out. It's the first time I thought, oh, what if you actually couldn't get them? When did this dawn on you that this contraception was it?
Yeah, probably. I had been out traveling, so I travel a lot for the foundation to Southeast Asia, all these different countries in Africa, and I would often be out to talk to women about vaccines, women and men, about the difference of vaccines in their children's lives. But when I stayed long enough to have a real conversation in the village, women started bringing up to me over and over about contraceptives, and I was surprised they, A, knew so much about them, and B, they were outraged. I mean, angry at me for good reason. They'd say, that clinic right there, you can see it. I can get a child vaccine there, my child's vaccine. I cannot get my contraceptives anymore. And so I just kept going to all these places in the world, and then this line. And so it was probably in about 2009, 2010, it just really dawned on me.
That's
we
recent,
have got
actually.
to figure this out.
Yeah.
It turns out there are 220 million women telling us they want access to contraceptives, the basic tools we use here in the United States, and we don't deliver those to those women. That's a crime.
And one of the things that you say is that really shook me is that there is no country in the last 50 years that has emerged from poverty without expanding access to contraceptives, because when women can space their births by at least 3 years, each baby is twice as likely to survive their first year.
Twice as likely.
Yes, and you related that to when you left Microsoft, said to your husband, Bill, I'm not coming back. I'm gonna stay at home. And you were able to space your children, which was a choice that you just took for granted at the time. Yeah. And now recognizing that women throughout the world don't have that choice.
Yeah, first of all, I was lucky to be able to get pregnant, which some women aren't. but this ability to space the births of each of our children so that I could have time with each one. And you know, I'm incredibly lucky. Look, I was born in the United States. I'm a white Caucasian woman with wealth, right? But there are women all over the world who will tell you it is a life and death crisis. I would be out in these villages and I'd literally be out and, you know, I'd have maybe 60 women around me. The men would be there first and they'd go back to the field. I've learned to let the men go back to the field eventually after we've talked and work. And talking then to the women, and I'd say, if there's 60 women, so how many of you know somebody that's in childbirth? And like 3/4 of the hands would go up. How many of you know somebody or have lost a child in childbirth? And all the hands would go up. And women would say to me, don't you understand? I had this one woman in Niger, Sadie, her was her name. She had 5 children and she had her youngest next to her, beautiful children. And she said to me, don't you understand? Don't you see? You see my small arid plot of land? It is not fair for me to have another child with these other children. I can hardly feed these children. And so this is a matter of life and death. And I have to be honest, when they first started telling me this, it broke my heart for one thing, but one, I kind of wanted to turn away from it. Go, no, I'm here to talk about vaccines. I'm gonna go home and think about vaccines or some other things. But then I thought, no, wait a minute. If I, for whatever reason, am in this situation where with Bill, we're getting to help put things on the global health agenda to try and help partners in the world and governments move forward, I have to face what women are truly telling me. And I also had to go look at the data, because when they were first telling me this, my husband is very data-oriented, which has been a huge gift. But he'd say, but Melinda, contraceptives are stocked in. Well, sure enough, at the highest level, when you read the reports, contraceptives are stocked in because of HIV/AIDS. But condoms are stocked in. And women all over the developing world have told me, I cannot negotiate a condom, even in my own marriage, because I'm either suggesting my husband has HIV/AIDS and has been unfaithful, or I'm suggesting I might have HIV/AIDS and I've been unfaithful. And so we weren't delivering the types of tools that women want and can use, and sometimes need to use covertly from their husbands. The biggest thing women use in Africa is a shot, which is why when I would bring up vaccines, a shot in a child's arm, they'd say, what about my shot? Depo-Provera, which was the main contraceptive tool being used in Africa.
And so you and Bill work really well together because he's very, very data-oriented, not to say that you're not, but you like to apply that data on the ground, correct? Yes. So you're like in the houses, in women's homes, out on the field, working with them, literally with them saying, please take my baby.
Yeah.
Have you ever been tempted to say, all right, I'll take this one home? Bill, bringing home some more children. Yeah.
That would be tough. That would be so tough. Yes, I mean, your heart is so broken when a woman asks you. So when I have been in a situation.
Tell us about the first time a woman asked you to take her child.
I was in northern India. I was visiting a local health clinic that we had partly funded in northern India. And a young woman named Mina, she had 2 little boys. She had a newborn baby boy. She had gone to the health clinic, delivered us the baby safely, and I was home back in her village to talk with her about that delivery and see how it went. We talked at length about her delivery. It went well. She was breastfeeding her baby boy. She clearly loved him. I was just there as a Western woman, which I often am, in a pair of khaki pants and a white T-shirt. She didn't know who I was, where I was from, just from the West. And she knew I was there to learn about what else could be done. And eventually I turned the conversation to, I wanted to ask her about contraceptives and what she knew. And when I asked her, I started with, would you like to have another child? And we'd been having this gorgeous conversation. And all of a sudden, she cast her eyes down for the longest time, and she wouldn't look at me. And I thought, okay, I've either made a social faux pas, or she doesn't understand, and eventually, after a very long pause, she looked up at me, and she said, I can't have any more children. She said, I don't have any hope for these 2 children. I have no hope. I can't hardly feed these kids. My only hope is if you take my 2 boys home with you. And that conversation crushed me.
But what did you do, though? What did you do, Melinda? Somebody says, take my 2 boys. So what did you actually then say and do?
I had to beg her for her forgiveness, and I just said, I just can't. You know, I'm sorry, but I can't. I have 3 children of my own at home. I know you love these boys. I can't. And it was
Are you tempted in that moment to say, here, let me give you some money, or let me help you with a da-da-da, let me help you? Are you tempted?
I think everybody's tempted to do
Yeah,
that. Believe me,
I've been
I would love to give her, you know, right there, 1,000, 10,000 rupees, right? But if I only lift up, we have to lift up everybody. I have to lift up individuals, but we also have to lift up millions of women. Mina's story that she had the courage to share with me is the story of hundreds of millions of women.
Yeah.
And so these resources that Bill and I have, we have to put them to the best use to lift up hundreds of millions of men, women, and children, not just the one. And so in those situations, I often will go back to the NGO, the non-governmental organization who's working there, and I will make sure the family gets a bit more resources, but I can't support them over their lifetime of what they need. I can hopefully give them enough that they can start to lift their family up a little bit.
Because yes, I've been in those situations where, and I know we all know the adage, you teach people to fish, you just don't give them fish. But sometimes when people are starving, they just need a fish. You know,
they need something in their stomach that day.
Something in their stomach that day. So how do you protect yourself from absorbing all of these kind of overwhelming problems on a grand scale, and when you're meeting people in person and people wanting to hand you their children and save me, save me, save me, save me?
Well, I think I know I've learned over time that you have to spend time in quiet. You just have to. And for me, after I've had one of these trips, I always, not sometimes, I always spend at least 24 hours in the place I've been or very nearby where I can be alone.
And literally decompress.
Decompress and be out in nature, usually walk on a beach, just be alone, because I write about this in the book. It's so important to let the pain in, to let my heart actually break. To not resist that pain. There's part of me that wants to go, oh, I didn't hear that, no.
Yeah.
But no, you have to let your heart break, and you have to let it move through you and hopefully eventually metabolize so I don't put it on somebody else or my anger, because I'm outraged usually. After these trips, I also go through these moments of outrage and anger. But then by the time I come home, I need to come home and obviously tend to my family. But when I walk through the doors of the foundation, I have to think about, what action is this calling me to? What action do I want to take on behalf of the world when I walk through these doors?
Coming up.
I actually loved in the book when you said, let your heart break, because I recognize that I've been one of those people who wants to resist it. You want to push it away. You don't want to have to take it all in, because like a lot of people, you feel like if I take it in, then I'm going to have to do something, and what can I do? And I'm already helping people over here. But I think this notion of let your heart break and then make a decision about what you can do after the heartbreak is the way to carry the moment of lift around the world.
I think in a certain way, it's the only way. I mean, I have to say, it took me 2 years to find the courage to answer the call of women asking me for contraceptives. 2 years. I had to wrestle. I mean, after I'd heard it a lot, I had to wrestle, look at the data, but I had to wrestle with my conscience. I grew up Catholic. The Catholic Church tells you, thou shalt not use contraceptives.
I was getting to that part.
Yeah. And you know, and I grew up, I am a Catholic. My family's Catholic, my parents. And so I had to wrestle with my own faith, what I had been taught growing up, and what I believe and what I use. And I had to say to myself, now, wait a minute. My kids are spaced 3 years apart, obviously. I'm using contraceptives. And I started to look at some data and say, okay, 90%+ of Catholic US women use contraceptives. And women all over are asking me for this. Why would I really let people die because of a religion I grew up in? And so it became a wrestling with what do I actually believe of my Catholicism and what do I need to let go of? And then, okay, how do I summon the courage? Because I did not want to stand on stage and say, guess what? I use contraceptives. Guess what? You know, I have sex with my husband. I have 3 kids. I mean, but you have to be vulnerable and do that to have the courage on behalf of other women.
And so, is that a turning point for you?
Huge turning point. Huge. And I spent a lot of time in quiet during those 2 years. And not to say I don't go to the foundation, didn't work, didn't travel, didn't have kids, but a lot of time in quiet and reading a lot of spiritual leaders who...
I know you're a big fan of Mark Nepo.
Mark Nepo.
We both love Mark Nepo, the poet. Actually, you named the book after one of his poems, Moment of Lift.
I did. But the person who helped me wrestle with my Catholicism was Father Richard Rohr. Listening to many, many, many of his lectures.
I've done him on Supersoul.
I know you have, and I watched. Okay. And it helped me wrestle with that. And then I finally had to face my own sense of where do I have doubt in my life as a woman? What is that about? And then courage. And I finally came to this point of which, if I'm telling my kids to use their voice eventually in the world, to use whatever talents they have, am I using my voice in the world? Am I using it on behalf of women? And so I had to really look at that and say, I need to do this. And so in 2012, I helped build, again, a global coalition to raise money. We raised, and I'd never done this before, it was totally new to me, raised $2.6 billion on behalf of contraceptives, and we put something for the first time.
Is it hard to raise money when your name is Melinda Gates?
Yes.
Because everybody thinks why don't you just spend your own money?
Well, there's that, but again, I could spend down the foundation very quickly. $2.6 billion doesn't go as far as you'd think, right? So even with our own resources, but I'll tell you what's hard to raise money on behalf of, is to go in and talk to a male government leader, which I do all the time, about why women's issues are important. And so now we've come around as a globe, but like when I would go show up at the UN 10 years ago, if you showed up at the UN, people weren't talking about girls. They were talking about women, maternal mortality. They weren't talking about girls. They weren't talking about girls' education. And they certainly weren't talking about contraceptives for women. And so you have to help these global leaders understand how it will help these nations lift out of poverty.
So what gives you hope that this power dynamic between men and women can or will change, particularly in developing countries throughout the world? What gives you hope that it will?
It is changing. So it has a long way to go. You have to kind of go country by country. But when I see male leaders, whether it's a traditional leader of a village, whether it's a local religious leader, whether it's Prime Minister Trudeau or President Macron, talking about women and being willing to fund it or being willing to make a cultural change or to learn. I talked to a religious leader in a village actually in Senegal, and he said to me, you know, when you all come here and listen to us over many, many, many years, which a local NGO have been doing, but then you also listen to what we need and you bring in some knowledge. He said, we learn and grow. And that's how we change.
And is the process bringing in the men too? Because I don't know how you save the women without also talking to the men. Because in so many communities, villages, and townships, the men are the ones who are in charge. So you have to go through the men to convince them that helping the women will make a difference in the entire community.
Absolutely. And that they have to be willing to invest some resources in that. They have to be willing to change. I mean, let's be honest. It is still, men still hold the keys to power, even in the United States.
Yes.
And so men and boys, and there are many enlightened men and boys. I work with a lot of them. I enjoy them. I love them. They have to be part of this conversation. They have to be willing to give up some power. But if you talk to men about their children, men and women, whenever I ask them in these villages, what are your hopes and dreams for you? They always answer about their children. So when men start to understand that their children will be better off if their wife has less labor at home and a little bit more resources and a little bit more voice, they'll be willing to start making that change.
I have found that also true for convincing men why girls need to be educated. that your daughter is going to come back and serve the family, help the family, lift the family up. Every time you educate a girl, you really are educating someone who's going to help the entire community.
Absolutely.
Coming up.
One of my favorite things about being a parent is seeing my kids fired up about something they learned in school. It reminds me how empowering knowledge is. I remember how excited I was when I was a student and had a new idea at my command. That's how I want my kids to feel, that the future is theirs to build. And that's how every single student deserves to feel when they step into a classroom. Our foundation has always invested in public schools, and it always will, because we believe it shouldn't matter where you're from, how much money you have, or what color your skin is. Every student should have the same opportunity to succeed. In America, we're still fighting for this reality on so many fronts. But a great public school can help students from all sorts of backgrounds create that equal opportunity for themselves. So we work with teachers, administrators, schools, and partners to try to help support them as they work to make their schools great. If all our public schools get the support they need to give all children an excellent education, we've got a great future in this country.
So on page 173, you say the starting point for human improvement is empathy. Everything flows from that. Empathy allows for listening, and listening leads to understanding. You later talk about this power of, like, connection, that the most important thing we can have as human beings with one another is not even equality, but a sense of connection to one another. So you believe that the supreme goal for the world is not just equality, but connection. And I agree with you. I think we're all so disconnected that we're all just kind of chipping away at our humanity. And it's the root cause of so many problems. How, then, do we here in America, with our own set of issues and things going on in our own lives, our dailiness, create a moment of lift for these 220 million women who don't have contraceptives, for the 130 girls who still have yet to go to school? You say we are the lift, but how can I be the lift? I'm just trying to get my bills paid.
So, first of all, you're absolutely right. I believe in connection between human beings, and that connection creates empathy, and we start to understand, and we learn, and we grow through that. And so if you hear this global problem, and it sounds, oh, it's far away, it's huge, these big numbers, you have to remember, we all have our hearts, our intellects, our energy, our time, and our resources.
Yeah.
And you can apply those in any amounts you want, tiny amounts, big amounts. But what I tell people is just get connected, understand what the issues are, read about them, connect with somebody else who's working on them, decide you're gonna volunteer time. Even in your own community, you'll see the difference that education makes in your own community for a girl. And whether it's even working in your community, look, our US school system's pretty broken. I'm out in the US school system a lot, so you've been out quite a bit too.
Yes.
But when you start to do that work and you put drops in the bucket of connecting with people and understanding other people's lives, you start to see how you have personal talents that you can contribute.
You know, the last conversation I had on air with your husband was about the broken school system, and he was saying, 8 years ago on the Oprah show, we still have this public school system that was created for kids going to school in 1954. You believe that the very future of our country is at stake because of what's going on in public schools.
Yeah, I think the United States stands for equal opportunity. And with our present school system, we don't have equal opportunity. If you go to one of these tough schools, your chance of going to a four-year college is even less than your chance of going to jail.
You all have spent millions and millions and millions of dollars to try to change it. Would you say you're moving the needle, or is it still a broken system?
It is still a broken system. And yet we will never give up on the US school system.
How does it feel when you've put millions and millions and millions of dollars into a thing and it doesn't still seem to work?
you keep changing. You
keep
keep
changing.
figuring out, you keep listening more, you keep learning, you keep iterating. There are some things we have done that have helped in pockets, but they haven't been scaled up yet. And so you keep learning. It is a bit like running a business, which is you have a plan, a strategy. My strategy is great teacher in front of every kid in the United States. You do that, you will really start to change the school system. But you have to tack on course when you don't get there. And we're learning even more locally about what it takes to build consensus and what the people in the school building think they need. And once you support what
that's the way to
they
fix it.
need,
Yeah.
then you start to grow and change a system.
Coming up. Twice here you mentioned raising your children and wanting to be the kind of person that can live an exemplified life before them. And I know your daughter is here. I often wonder, and I ask this not because you're one of the richest people on the planet Earth, but because I also ask this of my friends who are just well off. How do you raise kids who are responsible and kind, who grow up with a sense of grace, and yet have their own ambition when they have access to literally everything? How you do that?
Well, I would say it's purposeful over time. And again, I believe in putting lots of drops in the bucket. And I wouldn't say I've gotten it right. My daughter Jen, my oldest who's here, would tell you I've made mistakes too. But I think you constantly go back to your values. And
Do you? Because when I was growing up, my mother, you know, we were poor. So when she said we couldn't afford it, I knew we couldn't afford it. You can never say we can't afford it.
But that's true. And I wrestled with that with Jen, right, Jen?
You can never say you can't have that. We can't afford it. Put that down. Yeah.
And I got that message from my parents too, because we couldn't afford certain things. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. Right? So just because I could buy my daughter whatever, doesn't mean I should. Like, she doesn't learn if I just buy it from her or my son. And so our kids have always had an allowance growing up, and then bigger things that they wanted that their allowance wouldn't pay for, they put on their Christmas list or birthday list, and they might get it off their wish list from us or a relative, or they might not get it. But they started to learn the responsibility of money. And they know that our hope and our dream for them is to grow up and to find whatever it is they have. All kids have amazing potential and talent, and to use that talent on behalf of the world. And I think one of the things...
You have to be doing a good job to have enormous amounts of wealth and still have your kids grow up with their own ambition. Because I've also talked to people who say, well, what are you gonna do? You can't get the kids to work, you know?
But I think our kids see Bill and I work very hard. We don't have to work anymore, but we do. We work hard every single day. We take some vacations, so, you know, we take time off, but we work hard. And I think the other thing our kids see is they have been fortunate to travel a lot, both really nice travel, but they have been in and out of the developing world a lot too. And so they see, even from age 10, I started taking them out. They see how lucky they are. Lucky, not just to be in our family, lucky to have grown up in the United
Jen's shaking
States.
her head there, right?
Yeah. Right?
Yes. Because I think if you're a girl born in the United States, you're already one of the luckiest girls in the world.
Absolutely.
If you look at the rest of the world. Yes. I have to ask you this, though. As Melinda Gates, do you still look at the prices of things?
Depends on what it is. My husband actually memorizes the prices. If we go out to dinner and I'm taking a long time to order, and I'm like, oh, am I gonna have the chicken or the fish or the steak? And he'll go, $19.95 for the chicken, $39.95 for the steak. Not that he cares how much we spend on it, but he'll memorize the prices. So I sometimes just count on him.
Really? And can you ever, like, Gail, the other day we were someplace and she went shopping and she brought me this pocketbook. She goes, it was regularly like $15.75 and I got it for $1,000 for you, $1,000. I talked the guy out of $575.
That's fun.
And I'm like, why are you negotiating in the store with the thing? If you're Melinda Gates, you can't negotiate, right?
Well, my youngest daughter and I, the most recent store we've been in, she's 16 and she's spending her allowance. We were in Nordstrom Rack the other day. And we found, which is, their lower price, and we found a lot of things for both her and I bought a few things. It was pretty great.
on the
You want
Nordstrom
good
rack.
value. I don't care how much money you have.
Absolutely.
Coming up.
So you don't make New Year's resolutions, I hear. Instead, you choose a single word to bring your guidance for the year ahead. And some of your past words were like gentle, right? To help you fight perfectionism. Another year, I heard that your word was spacious, okay? As a reminder to make room for things in your life. And in 2018, you chose the word grace to signify that you're part of something bigger than yourself. So do you have a 2019 word?
I do, and I have to say it feels very vulnerable to share this because until last year I hadn't shared that I had a word or what it was. My word this year that came to me and is shine.
Ah,
And
look at you.
yeah, no, but it's not about me. And that's why I was a little bit, again, I was kind of resistant when the word came kind of in November. It usually comes sometime in November, December, January. But for me, what shine really means is that I believe every single person has a light inside of them, every single person. And if we can turn those lights on behalf of women, on behalf of people who don't have as much, on behalf of minorities in our own country, we all turn our lights on and we stand up for what's right, we will break through all these barriers. And guess what? We will all shine. The world will shine.
Thank you, Melinda Gates. The book is The Moment of Lift. So empowering. Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you. Good.